This show is part of OnePlace, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to our daily roundup. We have a packed episode today covering major legal developments and breaking crime news from across the country and beyond. Let's get right into the top stories.
Kidnapping survivors finally confront the man who terrorized them.
A Washington man kills his wife after a protection order.
Foster parents face trial for horrific abuse and starvation.
Famous rappers fight the use of lyrics as evidence.
Savannah Guthrie shares the terrifying details of her mother's kidnapping.
An Iowa man claims he killed his wife for mercy.
A California man is charged after a skull is found.
A Colorado neighbor is arrested for making graphic threats.
French police stop a bomb attack at a bank.
A Texas man gets 50 years for a taco stand murder.
Starting with our first story, the 2015 kidnapping of Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn is one of the most bizarre cases in California history, primarily because the police initially refused to believe them. It started at 3 a.m. when a man in a wetsuit broke into their home, claiming to be part of a professional robbery crew. He used red lasers to disorient them and forced Denise to tie Aaron up before drugging them both. Denise was taken away in a trunk, while Aaron was left behind under the threat of her being killed.
When Aaron finally called 911, the Vallejo Police Department treated him like a suspect rather than a victim. They even held a press conference calling the kidnapping a hoax, comparing it to the movie Gone Girl. It wasn't until Denise was released and another attempted kidnapping occurred elsewhere that the real perpetrator, Matthew Mueller, was caught. Now, the survivors are finally getting the last word against the man who terrorized them and the system that failed to protect them, proving their harrowing story was true all along.
Now let's shift to, in a devastating case from Washington state, 60-year-old Robert Child is facing first-degree murder charges for the deaths of his wife, Anna Child, and her boyfriend, Jason Hild. This tragedy occurred just one day after a judge granted Anna a protection order against Robert. She had explicitly told the court she didn't feel safe, quoting her husband as saying that if he couldn't have her, no one would. Despite the legal order, Robert allegedly entered a home in Hoodsport and shot both victims with a shotgun before fleeing.
The most chilling part of this story is that a neighbor actually encountered Robert right after the shooting. When asked what he had done, Robert reportedly claimed the victims pointed a gun at him first. However, the sheriff's office noted that the protection order hadn't even been served to Robert yet when the murders happened. This has prompted an internal investigation to see if law enforcement could have done more to prevent this outcome. It's a grim reminder of the extreme danger victims face during the divorce process.
Next up, in Ontario, Canada, a trial is concluding for two foster parents, Brandy Cooney and Becky Hamber, accused of the unthinkable. Prosecutors say they starved and abused their foster children, leading to the death of a 12-year-old boy known as LL. When first responders found him, he was soaking wet, covered in vomit, and so emaciated that he looked like a 6-year-old. The prosecution presented text messages where the women mocked the children's suffering, even suggesting they exercise to stay warm while being kept in wetsuits and helmets.
The defense is arguing that these extreme measures were actually intended to prevent the children from hurting themselves or having accidents. They claim that health professionals and social workers were aware of these methods and never raised any red flags. However, the prosecution pointed to a text from Cooney expressing fear that the boy would suddenly die and she would go to jail, suggesting they knew the risks. Since there is no jury, a judge will now decide if this was a case of discipline gone wrong or cold-blooded murder.
Moving on to, the U.S. Supreme Court is being asked to intervene in the execution of James Broadnax, a case that has drawn support from major hip-hop artists like Travis Scott and Killer Mike. Broadnax was sentenced to death for a 2008 double murder, but the core of the appeal focuses on the use of his rap lyrics as evidence during the trial. Prosecutors introduced 40 pages of his handwritten lyrics to portray him as a violent criminal. His lawyers argue this violated his right to a fair trial by exploiting racial stereotypes.
The rapper's brief argues that rap is held to a double standard compared to other genres, noting that nobody assumes Johnny Cash actually shot a man in Reno. This case has become a flashpoint for the broader movement to ban the use of artistic expression as a literal admission of guilt. Adding another layer of complexity, Broadnax's cousin recently confessed to the murders, claiming Broadnax took the blame. The Supreme Court's decision could have massive implications for how creative works are used in criminal trials across the entire country.
Now let's cover. NBC anchor Savannah Guthrie recently shared the deeply personal and terrifying story of her mother Nancy's kidnapping. The 84-year-old woman disappeared from her Arizona home in the middle of the night, leaving behind her purse, phone, and medicine. Savannah described the scene as surreal, with blood on the doorstep and security cameras ripped off the walls. The family even received ransom notes, though most were deemed not credible by investigators. Savannah was visibly emotional as she recalled the fear that her own public profile might have made her mother a target.
The investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is still ongoing, and Savannah's interview highlights the sheer vulnerability of the elderly in such situations. She questioned how anyone could take a frail woman in her pajamas who was already in significant physical pain. While DNA samples were collected from gloves found near the property, updates from detectives have been scarce. Savannah's decision to speak out brings a human face to the trauma of kidnapping, showing that even those we see on the news every day aren't immune to such tragedies.
Next story. In Iowa, new details have emerged regarding the murder of Amber Martin, a medical laboratory scientist. Her husband, James Martin, is charged with first-degree murder after allegedly stabbing her repeatedly with a kitchen knife. Chillingly, James's own mother witnessed the attack. She had come to the apartment because she was worried about her son's mental health. She woke up to the sound of Amber screaming for help and saw her son committing the act. Despite her pleas for him to stop, the attack continued until Amber was fatally wounded.
James Martin reportedly told investigators that he killed his wife to put her out of her misery because he believed they were in insurmountable financial trouble. This motive has shocked those who knew the couple, especially Amber's colleagues at the University of Iowa healthcare system. There was no indication that such violence was brewing, making the mother's eyewitness account even more haunting. James is currently being held on a $1 million bond as the legal process moves forward. It is a tragic example of how mental health crises can turn deadly.
Now let's shift to a California man named Joseph Dexter Taylor is in custody after a gruesome discovery on his property in a rural area north of Sacramento. Two neighbors called 911 after Taylor allegedly showed up at their home acting agitated and talking about a cremation. When deputies arrived at Taylor's residence, they found a burned human skull and other skeletal remains. Investigators believe the remains belonged to Chris Kidwell, who had been living on the property. Evidence suggests that Kidwell was shot before his body was burned in an attempt to hide the crime.
Taylor was already in jail on an unrelated warrant when the murder charges were added. The district attorney's office is currently waiting for DNA analysis to officially confirm the identity of the remains, but Kidwell's family had already reported him missing after not hearing from him for a week. The case has shocked the small community of Hurlton. Taylor now faces charges of murder, arson, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. It's a dark reminder of how quickly a missing persons case can turn into a homicide investigation.
Next up, in Colorado Springs, a long-standing neighbor dispute took a dark turn when Alex Mueller was arrested for making graphic threats. According to police, Mueller was caught on video throwing objects over a privacy fence and shouting that he wanted to see the neighbor's children's intestines draped over a wall. The victims were so terrified that they had already put their house up for sale to escape the escalating harassment. When police arrived, Mueller and his father allegedly taunted the officers, making shooting gestures and telling the police to take their own lives.
This wasn't Mueller's first run-in with the law, as he was already in violation of a protective order from a previous domestic violence case. The confrontation with police became so intense that they had to use shields and vehicles to establish a perimeter before making the arrest. While the exact wording of the threat was debated, authorities emphasized that the intent to harm children was clear. It's a terrifying scenario for any homeowner, showing how a bad neighbor situation can evolve into a serious criminal matter requiring a full tactical response.
Moving to, French police successfully foiled a potential terrorist attack outside a Bank of America building in Paris. Early Saturday morning, officers spotted a man attempting to set off a homemade explosive device. The device was surprisingly sophisticated, consisting of 9 pints of fuel, over 20 ounces of explosive powder, and a functional ignition system. The suspect was apprehended just as he was placing the device near the building, in the city's high-end 8th arrondissement. Fortunately, the office was closed at the time, and no injuries were reported among the bank's staff.
The National Anti-Terrorist Prosecutor's Office has taken over the investigation, filing multiple charges related to terrorist conspiracy and the manufacture of explosive devices. France's Interior Minister praised the quick actions of the police, stating they prevented a violent act of a terrorist nature. The motive behind targeting an American financial institution in Paris is still being investigated by domestic intelligence services. This incident highlights the ongoing high-security environment in major European cities and the constant vigilance required to prevent such attacks before they can cause devastating damage to the public.
And finally, a Texas man, Roland Contreras, has been sentenced to 50 years in prison for a senseless murder at a San Antonio taco stand. In April 2023, Contreras approached a man waiting in line for food and began yelling at him while brandishing a gun. The man's wife, Gabrielle Del Angel, was waiting nearby in their Jeep. As the couple tried to drive away to safety, Contreras fired into the vehicle, hitting Gabrielle in the chest. She was a beloved special education teacher and a mother of 3 who was simply out getting dinner.
The jury took only 30 minutes to find Contreras guilty of murder and aggravated assault. During the trial, it was revealed that Gabrielle was not even the intended target. Contreras was actually aiming for her husband. The husband was able to identify the shooter because of a connection to an ex-girlfriend. The district attorney emphasized that this sentence is a stand against random violence in the community. Gabrielle's obituary remembered her as a devoted mother who did everything for her children, making this tragic loss even more painful for the local community.
That's our roundup for today. Thank you for joining us for these important updates. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the stories that matter most. Have a safe day.